It's been 5 years since I buried my son, Mateo. 5 years. That's 1,825 days of learning how to breathe with a collapsed lung, how to walk with a phantom limb. Grief isn't just a chapter in your life, it becomes the whole book. You learn to live with a hole in your soul, a permanent emptiness where a kid's laughter is supposed to be. I was Elena Vasquez, and my world had become this quiet, gray landscape of just surviving. I really had convinced myself that the worst was behind me, that the tsunami of pain had finally pulled back, leaving a desolate shoreline I could learn to live on. I was so wrong. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just been sleeping. 2 weeks ago, my phone rang. A voice from the past whispered words that clawed my son's memory right out of the grave and set my entire world on fire. It was his old teacher, a woman I once would have trusted with my life. And what she told me, it didn't just change everything. It revealed that my entire life, my grief, my loss, it was all built on the most monstrous lie you could possibly imagine. Before we get into the secret I've been carrying, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment below guessing what you think the final twist is going to be. Okay, where were we? I remember the exact second the world shattered. It was 5 years ago. A Tuesday. One of those dreary Portland evenings where the rain can't decide if it's a drizzle or a real downpour. I was 37 back then, a single mom pouring every single ounce of myself into my 12-year-old son, Mateo. He was my universe, my whole reason. We'd come to the United States from Mexico when he was just a toddler, just two hopeful souls chasing a better life after his father, Carlos, decided our little family was a dream he didn't want anymore. Life in Oregon was tough. I wasn't just a mother, I was a provider, a protector, a machine that ran on caffeine and pure willpower. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. During the day, I was invisible, scrubbing floors in downtown office buildings, the smell of bleach always clinging to my clothes. At night, I was a voice without a face, translating documents from English to Spanish, my brain swimming in legal jargon and technical manuals until the sun came up. It was all for him. For our little 2-bedroom house, for his soccer cleats, for the science camps he was so obsessed with. Mateo was my anchor in a storm of exhaustion. He had this laugh, this bright, booming sound that could fill every corner of our house and chase out the shadows. His curiosity never quit, a beautiful, exhausting storm of whys and hows. He was just my everything. That night I got home late. The rain had finally made up its mind and was beating a sad rhythm on the roof. The house was quiet, way too quiet. My heart, already tired from a 16-hour day, started to pound with this primal dread. I called his name. Mateo. Mijo. Nothing. Just silence. I found him on the living room floor. His small, precious body was so pale and completely still. Scattered around him like fallen leaves were the empty, orange bottles of my prescription painkillers. The ones I kept on the highest shelf for the chronic back pain I got from a decade of manual labor. The paramedics came. The police came. They were kind, I guess, their faces a blur of professional sympathy. They used words like accidental, experimental, tragic curiosity. An accidental overdose, they called it. It was a neat, tidy little explanation that closed a case file and let the world keep spinning. But for me, the world had just stopped. And even then, through the thick, suffocating fog of shock, some part of me, the part that was tied to him soul to soul, knew it wasn't an accident. There were whispers I'd ignored, small changes in his behavior I'd blamed on being a preteen. My son wasn't reckless. He was careful. He was my careful boy. But nobody wanted to hear a grieving mother's gut feeling over a coroner's report. The funeral was a total haze. Friends and neighbors offered condolences that felt like heavy stones in my hands. And then there was Ms. Harper, Rebecca Harper. She'd been my English instructor at community college when I first got to America, a scared but determined immigrant in my 20s. But she was more than that. Rebecca had been my mentor, my champion. She saw a spark in me and fanned it into a flame, helping me with my resume, pushing me to apply for that translator job. In a lot of ways, she was my American savior. But at Mateo's funeral, she was like a stranger. She stood way off in the distance. Her words of comfort felt brittle and cold, and her eyes just wouldn't meet mine. I was too deep in my own ocean of sadness to question it at the time. Her being distant was just another drop in the flood. In the months after, I took my life apart piece by piece. I quit my jobs. I sold the house that echoed with his ghost's laughter. I packed my grief into 2 suitcases and ran to a tiny, anonymous apartment on the industrial edge of Seattle. I tried to outrun the memories, but they have a funny way of keeping up. Therapy sessions all blurred together. Friends, not knowing what to say, eventually just stopped saying anything. I became a shadow. My life wasn't marked by days or weeks anymore, but by the yearly trip to his grave, to that small, cold stone that mocked me with his name. Every year, I'd place a single white rose on the grass and whisper a promise I had no idea how to keep. I will find the truth, Mijo. I promise. 2 weeks ago, the ghost in the machine picked up the phone. It was late, almost midnight. My apartment was dark. The only light was the far-off glow of the city. An unknown number from a Portland area code lit up the screen. My first thought was to ignore it. Who could possibly be calling me from a life I'd already burned to the ground? But this chill, sudden and sharp, went right down my spine. A mother's intuition, maybe. Or just the dread of someone who knows that bad news never waits for morning. I answered. A woman's voice, shaky and thin, crackled over the line. Elena Vasquez. Who is this? I asked, my own voice hoarse from not using it. It's Rebecca Harper. Your old teacher. The name hit me like a punch. A flood of disconnected memories. A classroom. A kind smile. A cold face at a funeral. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. Rebecca? What is it? What's wrong? Her voice dropped to this frantic whisper, and it was laced with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't sympathy. It was fear. Or was it guilt? Elena, you need to listen to me very carefully. I got a call today. From a hospital. She took a shaky breath. It's Mateo. He's asking for you. My world tilted. The phone almost slipped right out of my hand. I couldn't breathe. My mind just snagged on his name, refusing to process the rest of the sentence. Mateo. My Mateo. The one I buried. Gone. What did you say? My voice was a choked whisper. That's not funny, Rebecca. That's a sick, cruel joke. It's not a joke, Elena, she insisted, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. They found him. He was in a coma all this time. They found him at some private clinic. He woke up. He's weak, but he's alive, and he was mumbling your name. The clinic reached out to me. I was still listed as an emergency contact from his old school files. Emergency contact? Why her? Why not me, his mother? The questions buzzed in my brain like angry hornets, but one single, impossible, beautiful word drowned them all out alive. Where is he? I demanded. I was already on my feet, pacing my tiny apartment. St. Mary's Clinic, just outside Portland, she said. Elena, you have to come. They say it's a miracle. A miracle. Or a trap. The logical part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible. That this was some kind of scam, a hoax of unspeakable cruelty. But the mother in me, the part that had been starving for 5 solid years, was already packing a bag. Hope is a powerful, dangerous thing. It can bring you back to life, or it can be the thing that finally destroys you for good. I booked the first flight in the morning. My pulse thundered in my ears for the whole 90-minute trip, my soul torn between the terror of a lie and the unbearable hope of a truth that could literally rewrite the universe. Landing in Portland felt like stepping back into a photograph of an old wound. The city hadn't changed. The air was still thick with that familiar smell of damp earth and pine, a smell that used to be comfort, and was now the scent of my son's last day on earth. Every street corner, every patch of gray-green park, was a ghost. Rebecca was waiting for me right past baggage claim. She looked nothing like the vibrant, confident woman I remembered. At 58, her once fiery red hair was a faded mess streaked with anxious gray. Her sharp blue eyes, the ones that used to sparkle with intelligence, were now just dull and clouded, shadowed by secrets I was just starting to feel. She lived in this pristine, 3-story Victorian house on a hill overlooking the city, the kind of place that screams old money and privilege. It was a world away from the cramped apartments of my own life. He's at St. Mary's, she said as I slipped into her luxury sedan, the leather seats cold against my skin. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were glued to the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. They're running some tests. It's all very sudden. They're calling it a miracle. Why you, Rebecca? I asked, my voice flat. The hope that flew me here was starting to curdle into suspicion. Why would a hospital call his elementary school emergency contact after 5 years? Why not me? My information was on every single form. She waved a hand dismissively, a little too quick, a little too rehearsed. Old files, Elena. Bureaucracy. You know how it is. You moved, you changed your number. I was the only stable contact they could find. We should just be grateful they found him at all. Her explanation sounded plausible, but it felt thin, like a cheap sheet stretched over something jagged and ugly. Why were her hands shaking so badly? Why did she keep glancing at me in the rearview mirror, not with concern, but with this strange, calculating fear? The clinic was a modern, sterile building of glass and steel. It felt more like a corporate office than a place for healing. At the front desk, my heart hammered against my ribs as the receptionist typed. Vasquez, Mateo. Yes, we have him. Room 214. Down the hall to your left. That confirmation sent a jolt of pure, raw hope through me. He was real. He was here. I broke into a run, with Rebecca trailing behind, calling my name. The hallway was just a white blur, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. I didn't even knock. I burst through the door to room 214, my son's name a prayer on my lips. The room was empty, and not just empty of a person. It was pristine, unused. The bed was perfectly made with crisp, white sheets. The nightstand was bare, except for a brochure for the clinic. No chart, no clothes, no sign that a human being, let alone my son, had ever been there. Panic, cold and total, grabbed me. Where is he? I spun around to face Rebecca, who was just lingering in the doorway, her face the color of ash. Where is he, Rebecca? Just then, a doctor, a man in his 50s with kind but very confused eyes, walked up behind her. Can I help you, ma'am? My son, I gasped, pointing at the empty bed. Mateo Vasquez. The receptionist said he was in this room. The doctor's brow furrowed. Vasquez? No, I'm sorry, we don't have a patient by that name. We had a John Doe admitted yesterday with some memory loss, but he was evaluated and transferred to a state facility this morning. Who told you your son was here? My eyes snapped back to Rebecca. Her whole carefully built act was cracking, crumbling at the edges. She stammered, unable to even look at the doctor. A misunderstanding. A mistake. I must have gotten the clinic name wrong. I'm so sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry. But I wasn't listening to her apology. I was listening to the echo of my own gut feeling from 5 years ago. I was seeing, with horrifying clarity, the pieces of a puzzle I never even knew existed. Memories started crashing into each other in my mind. Mateo, after one of his after-school tutoring sessions with Rebecca, complaining that she was weird. The way she would insist on giving him extra help, pulling him aside when I came to pick him up. How he sometimes came home pale and withdrawn, clutching his stomach and saying it hurt from the special sweets she gave him. I dismissed it all. He was a kid. She was my mentor, the woman who helped me build a life here. I had trusted her. Completely. Blindly. The drive back to her Victorian prison was silent and suffocating. The rain had started again, pounding on the windshield like a frantic heartbeat. The second she closed the heavy oak door behind us, I turned on her. Tell me everything, Rebecca. Not the lies. Not the excuses. The truth. Now. We stood in her perfect living room, surrounded by portraits of stern-faced ancestors and shelves of leather-bound books. She moved like a robot, putting a kettle on, her hand shaking so hard the porcelain cup rattled in its saucer. Her eyes, filled with this terrifying mix of pity and terror, darted towards the windows, the doors, as if she were expecting someone. And in that moment, as she handed me a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking, the world shattered for a second time. She confessed. It all came out in broken whispers, the ugly, twisted truth of the last 5 years. Mateo hadn't overdosed by accident. It was her. For months, in their private tutoring sessions, she had been giving him sedatives. Small doses at first, ground up in candies she knew he loved. Just enough to make him quiet, compliant, easy to handle. Her motive was a ghost from a past I knew nothing about. Years ago, back in Mexico, before I ever met him, my ex-husband Carlos had been her lover. She was an American teaching abroad. He was a charming local. She had been obsessed with him. When he met me and chose me, she saw it as a theft. She believed I had stolen her life, her future. Her kindness to me, her mentorship, it was all a long, patient game. Her way of staying close to us. When Carlos finally left me, her simmering rage didn't have a target anymore, so it twisted and turned on the one thing I had left of him, my innocent boy. The living symbol of everything she felt she had lost. She swore she never meant to kill him. "I'm not a monster," she insisted, her voice pleading. She just wanted to dull his spirit, to make him hers in some sick, twisted way. That night, the mix of her drugs and the single painkiller he took for a headache created a perfect storm. But he didn't die. The paramedics revived him in the ambulance. He was alive, but just barely. And in the chaos of the emergency room, Rebecca saw her chance. She used her reputation, her connections as a respected school administrator. She pulled strings, called in favors. She had him declared brain dead, his records sealed to protect the family's privacy. Then, she had him transferred, not to a morgue, but to a private, long-term care facility under a fake name. John Doe. For 5 years, she had kept him trapped between life and death. Comatose. A living ghost. She paid off nurses, forged documents, and created a whole new identity for my son. She had orchestrated the entire lie to punish me in the most profound way possible, not by killing my son, but by stealing him. By letting me bury an empty casket and mourn a child who was still breathing, hidden away just miles from where I slept. "I didn't kill him, Elena," she sobbed, collapsing in a heap on her expensive Persian rug. "I saved him. I saved him for myself. You never deserved him." A sound came out of my throat, something primal and inhuman. But it wasn't a scream of rage. It was the sound of something inside me turning to solid ice. The grief, the fire, the pain, it all cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a single, deadly point. I let myself fall to my knees, copying her collapse. I let the tears come, the racking sobs of a mother broken for a second time. I let her crawl to me, wrap her arms around me, and whisper her sick, twisted words of comfort. And as she held me, the predator comforting the prey, my plan started to form. My vengeance wouldn't be quick or loud. It would be a quiet, patient, psychological dismantling. I would live in her house, eat her food, breathe her air. And I would become the ghost that would tear her world apart, piece by painstaking piece, for the next 3 days. I was a phantom in her house. I had to play the part of the shattered woman, and I had to be perfect. I stayed in the guest room she gave me, a lavender-scented cage with silk sheets. I barely ate. I just stared out the window for hours, my face blank, letting her see the broken, fragile thing she believed me to be. It was the hardest performance of my life. Every instinct I had screamed at me to just tear her world apart with my bare hands, but the strategic part of my mind, the one I'd sharpened over years of fighting to survive, knew my only weapon was her arrogance. She and her whole family saw me as the poor, uneducated immigrant cleaner. They saw me as weak, and in their condescension, they were completely blind. Her family started showing up at the house like vultures, sensing a fresh kill. First was her brother, Arthur, a lawyer in his late 60s with a cold, reptilian smile and eyes that looked at my grief like it was an item on a balance sheet. He was the one, Rebecca had confessed, who handled the legal complexities of Mateo's disappearance, forging the death certificate and setting up the trust that paid for the clinic. Then came his wife, Cynthia, a woman whose face was pulled tight by surgery and smugness. She was the head nurse at the very clinic that held my son, the one who personally gave him the drugs to keep him under, who faked the charts, and who managed the conspiracy from the inside. They would sit with me in that grand living room, flanking me on the sofa, their voices dripping with fake sympathy. "Poor Elena," Cynthia would murmur, putting a cold hand on my arm. "To go through this twice. It's just unthinkable. You must be so fragile." Arthur would nod gravely, adjusting his silk tie. "We're worried about your stability, Elena." Rebecca told us how emotional you can be. It's important you let us take care of you. Don't trouble yourself with the details. The details. Every word they said was a confession, and my phone, tucked in my cardigan pocket, was my silent witness. It was always recording. I got hours of their self-incriminating whispers, their talks about the Elena problem, their plans to have me committed if I started asking too many questions. They were building a cage of gaslighting around me, and they had no idea I was patiently collecting the bars. During the day, when Rebecca thought I was napping, my real work started. I'd slip out of the house and walk to the public library downtown. It became my war room. Using my skills as a translator and researcher, I dug into the digital world they thought was beyond me. I filed carefully worded public records requests, digging into Arthur's law firm and his real estate holdings. I found a pattern of shell corporations and shady deals, a hidden empire of wealth built on swindling people, wealth that was paying for my son's imprisonment. I cross-referenced employee lists from the clinic with Cynthia's known friends, flagging 2 other nurses who had gotten large, unexplained payments from one of Arthur's shell companies. I didn't hack anything. I just used the tools available to anyone with enough patience and a burning, righteous fury. I was connecting the dots, building a web of evidence so thick that by the time I was done, they would have no way out. The turning point came on the 4th day. I needed something tangible, something of his. I was drawn to the attic, a place of dust and forgotten things. Behind a stack of old trunks, I found it, a small, leather-bound photo album. My hands trembled when I opened it. It wasn't Rebecca's. The first picture was of a boy, about 13, with Mateo's eyes but none of his light. He was sitting in a dim room with a sad little cake and a single candle. Another photo showed him a year later, taller, in a wheelchair, staring blankly at a TV. Then another, and another. My son, growing up in a basement prison. Pictures of him post-death. A secret chronicle of his stolen boyhood. I saw him with Rebecca, her arm around his shoulder, her face a mask of possessive, maternal love. I just sank to the floor. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, white fire that threatened to burn me up from the inside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn the house to the ground. But I didn't. I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Rebecca. She found me there, surrounded by the proof of her monstrous love. For a split second, I saw real fear in her eyes. But then I let the album fall from my hands and let out a gut-wrenching sob, a performance of pure devastation. He looks so much like him, I cried, faking a fresh wave of grief. It worked. Her fear was instantly replaced by a triumphant pity. She rushed to my side, cradling me, telling me it was just a coincidence, a cousin of hers who had passed away. She thought my mind was finally breaking. She was so blinded by her own ego, her belief in my weakness, that she couldn't see the truth. She didn't see a woman breaking. She saw a woman who was no longer a threat. And that night, feeling like she'd won, she got careless. Section 4, the final revelation and the dawn of justice. That evening, the house was quiet. Rebecca and her family, convinced I was sedated and tucked away after my episode, had all gone to bed. But I wasn't sleeping. My mind was a razor blade, sharpened by years of pain and weeks of rage. I knew I had most of the pieces, but one was still missing, Mateo. Was he still in a coma? Was he aware? The not knowing was its own special kind of torture. I had to get into Rebecca's study. It was the one room she always kept locked, the nerve center of her entire secret life. After waiting for the house to fall into that deep silence of 2 a.m., I crept out of my room. The lock on her study was old, a simple skeleton key type. It was no match for the skills you learn when you've had to jimmy your own apartment lock a few times. A hairpin and 10 seconds of tense silence, and I was in. The room hummed with the energy of deceit. I didn't turn on the lights, just used the glow from my phone and went straight to her desk. In the bottom drawer, under a pile of tax returns, I found a locked metal box. This lock was more modern, but right next to it, on the desk blotter, was a small, framed photo of Rebecca with an older woman, her mother. Etched into the back of the frame was a date. A birthday. It was a long shot, but people are creatures of habit. I tried the 6-digit date on the combination lock. Click! Inside, my breath caught in my throat. It was filled with letters. And a journal. A cheap, spiral-bound notebook. The handwriting was a boy's, shaky at first, but it got stronger with each entry. The first page was dated 2 years ago. I started to read, and the final, earth-shattering pieces of the puzzle slammed right into place. The journal belonged to Mateo. He had woken up. Not recently. 2 years ago. He woke up alone in a white room, his body weak, his memory a fog. But he's my son. He's brilliant. He slowly pieced it all together from whispers he overheard between the nurses, from things Rebecca would say when she thought he was asleep. He learned the truth of his death, of my mourning, of the woman who called herself a savior. And he did the most courageous thing imaginable. He played along. To survive, he pretended his memory was gone, that he believed her story about being his aunt who'd rescued him. He let her call him Alex. He was waiting, biding his time, gathering his own intelligence. But that wasn't even the biggest bomb. Tucked in the back of the journal were older, faded letters. Letters written by Rebecca to her estranged mother. And in those pages was a truth that changed everything. My father, the man I barely remembered from my childhood in Mexico, had another family. An American family he had abandoned. Rebecca was my half-sister. Our father had chosen me, his Mexican daughter, showering me with affection on his brief visits, while casting her and her mother aside. Her obsession with Carlos wasn't just about a man. It was a proxy war. She wanted my life because she felt it should have been hers. Carlos, and then Mateo were just the prizes. Her betrayal wasn't just jealousy, it was the twisted, poison fruit of a shared bloodline. And then, the final piece. Mateo wrote about finding a small, old prepaid phone. One I had given him for his 12th birthday for emergencies. He'd hidden it in the lining of his old backpack. It still had a charge. The call to Rebecca wasn't from a hospital. It was from Mateo. He knew she was the only one who would react. He used her, his own captor, as a pawn. It was a signal, a brilliant, desperate message sent across 5 years of silence. Not a plea for rescue, but a declaration. He wasn't waiting to be saved. He was waiting for his partner. He was waiting for me. My son had never, ever lost faith in me. That revelation was like a shot of pure adrenaline to my soul. The grief, the fear, it all burned away, leaving only a cold, diamond-hard purpose. I took the journal, the letters, and my phone full of their confessions. Back in my room, I spent the rest of the night orchestrating their downfall. I put everything into a single, damning digital file. I made a throwaway email account. I found a public forum for whistleblowers and a network of immigrant rights groups I knew, people who knew what it was like to be dismissed. I set up a hidden camera in the living room, a tiny lens peeking out from a bookshelf, and linked it to a private live stream. I sent the link to the forum and the groups. The audience was ready. The next morning, I came downstairs. I was no longer the fragile, grieving mouse. I was calm. I was the angel of their reckoning. I told Rebecca to gather Arthur and Cynthia for a family meeting. "There's something I need to understand," I said, my voice perfectly even. They assembled in the living room, looking annoyed and pitiful. This was it. The final act. I let the hidden camera start streaming. "Thank you for coming," I began. "For 5 years, I have lived in a world of grief. A world that you built for me." Arthur scoffed. "Elena, if this is another one of your episodes." "It's not an episode," I said, locking my eyes on Rebecca. "It's a correction." I took out my phone and played the first recording. It was Arthur, talking to Rebecca about the legal firewalls around Mateo's identity. His smug face went slack, his skin turning pasty white. Cynthia gasped. "Then there was this," I said, turning on the large TV and connecting my phone. The photos from the attic flooded the screen. Mateo's dead-eyed birthday parties. His vacant stare. The images I had cried over were now my weapons. Cynthia started to hyperventilate. "What is this? How did you?" I ignored her. I picked up Mateo's journal. "But this," I said, my voice thick with real emotion for the first time, "is a story. Not yours." I began to read. I read about his awakening. I read about his fear. I read about his survival, his intelligence, his patient waiting. I read his words about the woman he knew as Aunt Rebecca. Finally, I looked right at Rebecca, her face a grotesque mask of horror. "He called you, didn't he?" It was his signal. To me. I let that hang in the air, then delivered the final blow. And I know why you did it. I read your letters. The ones to your mother. I paused. Hello, sister. The word sister broke her. A strangled sob escaped her lips. At that exact moment, I hit send on the email. The dossier, the recordings, the financial records, the scans of the journal and letters, the full narrative went to the state police, the DA's office, the state bar, the medical board, and every major news outlet in Oregon. As if on cue, their phones began to buzz. One after another, then all at once. News alerts with their names on them. The sound of an empire crumbling in real time. Arthur stared at his phone, his face completely blank. Cynthia was openly weeping. Rebecca just collapsed, whispering my name over and over. That's when we heard it. The faint, distant sound of sirens, growing steadily closer. They weren't coming for an arrest. Not yet. They were coming for the story, for the questions, for the beginning of their end. Rebecca crawled towards me, grabbing at my pants. Elena, sister, please forgive me. I looked down at the woman who had stolen my son, my life, my sanity. I felt nothing. No pity, no hate, just the end. I stepped back from her grasp, turned, and walked out of that heavy oak door without a single look back. The morning air was crisp and clean. The rain had stopped, and standing on the sidewalk, just beyond the gate, was a 17-year-old boy with my eyes and a hesitant, hopeful smile. My son. My Mateo. He was taller, thinner, but it was him. The light was back in his eyes. He took a small step towards me, and then we were both running, closing that 5-year gap in a few desperate seconds. I wrapped my arms around him, my real, living, breathing son, and for the first time in forever, the hole in my soul started to feel a little less empty. Justice wasn't about their punishment. It was about this moment. It was about him. It was about us, finally free. In the quiet that followed, as Mateo and I started building a new life from the rubble of the old one, I had a lot of time to think. Vengeance is a complicated thing. It's not the clean, satisfying one you see in the movies. It healed the wound, but it definitely left a scar on my soul. It taught me that justice isn't always pure. Sometimes, it's messy and calculated and cold. But sometimes, when you've been living in an endless, suffocating darkness, it's the only thing that can light the way out. Was it worth it? Every sleepless night, every recorded whisper, every lie I told to trap them in their own web? I look at my son, learning to laugh freely again, and I know the answer. For him, for our peace, yes. 1,000 times, yes. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button right now. I have to know what you think. Tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? Your perspective means the world. And please, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You will not want to miss the stories I have coming up next.